Okay, so just beginning to let people into the session today. Looking very forward to having George Leoniak with us to be able to discuss some aspects of his new geometry, KNEW geometry. George, do you want to welcome? So wonderful to have you here for a temple talk. And do you want to just share what we're going to go over today as people are slowly coming on?
Sure, yeah. I have a presentation. I might have gone a little over in the amount of slides. I'm sure Meredith and I could probably talk for hours about geometry and cram this session with a lot of slides, but we're going to look at Metatron's cube and some of the discoveries that I've been making with that, some things that work with the golden ratio, talking about a lot of the platonic solids and different ways to create those, and then just what new geometry is offering in uh, a kind of expansive working with the forms of how we can work with the compounding and the stellation of the forms and how expansive it can be. So those are some of the things that we'll be discussing today.
Awesome. So I was saying that I wanted to start with a little bit of a conversation that you and I were having in organizing today's talk. Because I think it's so important to lay the groundwork of why the geometry matters in the first place, and why is it that we're doing the things that we do, like why and who cares kind of thing. And so even when you were describing to me the idea of, the fact that Metatron's cube isn't actually proportionally correct, and the ways that it can scale and expand, the question that I know comes up for people, and that was even coming up for me, was like, how important is this? And what I really drew from the conversation, and I'm going to have you riff on this, but what I really got from it was just how important it is. Like when you're dealing with a resonance, like if you're in a really holy place, there's a particular resonance there, and it allows us, or even if you have like your own space that you're setting up to be able to do your own practice in, that space starts to imbue with the feeling and the energy of what it is that you are bringing to it. And so if you're in a very holy place, it's like a guitar string plucking, and it gets all the same resonance in other people resonating at the same field. And this is why the idea of heart coherence is coming up so much. We've been talking a lot about the brain in the world. Now we're talking more about the heart. One day, the reproductive system and the engine that is might come into the conversation, because that is the trinity of the Taoist idea too. And of course, we're not here without that. But there's this idea that resonance is what's bringing us into an alignment. And why that resonance is important to me is because it's bringing the subconscious and the conscious mind together. So the left and the right sides of the brain coming into coherence. And when that happens, there's an incredible amount of intuition that comes through, of expanded creativity. Geometry to me is a symbol of resonance. And so if a line is off, and like, for instance, when we did the interview that you so graciously did with me about my Kabbalic star shape that I kind of uncovered in the body, I was going sheerly by sensation. And what you and somebody else has pointed out is that there's an incredible amount of validity to it. And I didn't understand this term validity. Like I just thought, well, geometry is geometry, but it was pointed out, if it doesn't hold up to like really all angles and all perspectives, then it's just a nice piece of art. And that my shape holds up to all angles, so to speak, no pun intended. And so there is a powerful resonance, and it speaks a truth because it lines up that way. And so if we're talking if we're talking about Metatron's cube or something to that degree, and it's not lining up, then we don't have a resonance of our nervous system looking at this frequency of our own nervous system. And that prevents us from being able to actually hit that sweet spot, or where the magic is in geometry. That's why it feels important to me. So I just wanted to kind of lay that as a main talking point before you explain the beauty of the geometry. Yeah, just riff on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you summed it up really beautifully there. And I mean, I can't add a lot more to in terms of the frequency and the resonance and how the intuition opens up. It's kind of like you're unlocking this sacred geometric puzzle that really allows for an expansion for the geometer in their sandbox of working with the different tools of the trade. And it is more than art. It is combining both the left and the right side of the brain, like you said. I mean, that's the beauty for anybody who enters into the path of working with sacred geometry. You know, you're doing drawings or building forms, which is also a very intuitive process of cutting out the forms and making them, or working with zone tools. I mean, the hands and the body has its own intelligence. It just starts to work and understand these shapes of how they work. But in doing the drawings themselves, you can take a kind of scientific approach, and you can look at angles and measurements and phi ratio. You can take that same design and erase a few lines here and color in different patches, and you would never know that that form is hidden within there. But there's a difference when what's hidden in there carries all that resonance that you described of all those angles underlying it. A viewer might not be able to know that all that hidden mystery is within there, but it is. And that's the beauty of the design, is that it is all hidden in there. So it is a big deal in terms of the Metatron's cube correction. I have many videos of this on my YouTube channel, New Geometry, KNEW, that discuss a lot of those features. And I've pulled together some of my best slides because this is a more of like, you have to see it, you have to see it to really understand it, and once you see it, you really can't unsee it. So we're going to go through those slides and not just leave you hanging out there, like, oh, well, there's an issue here. I've worked extensively on like the geometric terrain to figure out multiple ways for all different age groups to interact with the most simplistic of drawings to the most complex drawings, of how you can really integrate this different pattern language that is eye-opening, expansive, mind-opening, intuitive resonance feelings that Meredith was just describing. So it's kind of the geometric journey of the presentation that I have laid out. And so we'll start off with just a little bit about just seeing what the issue is, right? Because you have to see this. It's a very visual language, and just describing it and me holding my hands up, waving them around is definitely not going to give you the full effect of what it is I'm describing. Mm-hmm. So Meredith, do you want to add anything else to that?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to, there's two things. One is, I don't know how much we went into how you started in this. So I don't know if you want to discuss either at the beginning or at the end, why your whole history of tracking and all of that. And the one thing that I wanted to add to the conversation is that in relation to the body, in relation to the work that I've been focused on and that I ran into geometry, the nervous system to me is just frequency, and those frequencies create pattern, and those patterns turn out to be geometric. They can be lines or they can be circles. So when we're looking at geometry, it's our nervous system watching itself watch itself. And there's a magic that happens there. And so that's where the body has shown me this bizarre world of geometry I had no idea I would be involved in, but it makes logical sense because it's frequency, and it's conscious frequency communicating, and symbols can be passed down through the ages in ways that words cannot, languages cannot. They allow, once you can understand the key and you unlock it, it can pass millennia and still tell you the same thing. And so these, whether it's the flower of life, the seed of life, Kabbalic structure, Metatron's cube, well, Metatron's cube is more recent, you pointed out before. These forms and these shapes are what convey a reality, like we're fish swimming in water and we don't realize that there's geometric structure in the water that we're made of and that we're surrounded by. So I say that so that as for the viewers, and thank you for those of you who are coming on live to hang out with us, we'll definitely take your questions and you can drop them in the chat and I will moderate that for George. I wanted to kind of lay that groundwork so that as we're going into the kind of mental structures of what's going on, that we're recognizing we're watching our own frequency and we're setting up a frequency to understand where energy can run most clearly. That's how I see it.
Mhm.
So George, please do take it away. Share with us your beginnings with tracking now if you want, or later, but I know it would be interesting for people to
Sure, I
hear.
did drop in a few slides in the beginning, so I'm just going to kind of about that background in the tracking journey because the
Great,
two are intimately linked. So I'm just going to get some visuals up for folks so we could start working on
fabulous.
the slide here, the slideshow. Um, Let me know if you're seeing it now, Meredith.
Yes,
All right, perfect. All right, well, this is new geometry. Here we are, new geometry. Okay, that's all that slide did. Welcome. Thank you, everybody, for coming out today. And I want to just go over a little bit about how I got into sacred geometry. And it's really something that's kind of ran tangent for quite a while, or let's say parallel, not tangent, but parallel to my interest in animal tracking. I'm a wildlife tracker, one of the most recognized trackers in the US and internationally, teaching tracking for a long time. I have about 25 years of teaching tracking and just learning that trade. It's a very visually oriented skill set. I mean, you're really interpreting patterns from nature, so you're trying to find obscure things in these complex patterns. So that's my background, and I'm a trained conservation biologist too. I have a Master of Science degree in that. So I really have a research bent of my background that really looks at the details. I'm a highly detailed person. And if you get into sacred geometry, the way that I entered into it, it was very detailed oriented. So that's why little differences in a little line being off is like a giant, is a big line being off basically. So the way I got into it was about, I guess probably when I was about 19 or 20, I actually got both of these books. So over 30 years ago. This one is Voices of the First Day. And this is the first book I got by Robert Lawler. Now, Robert Lawler is mostly known for his book on the right here in the sacred geometry field, Philosophy and Practice. That's probably one of the best standing books of sacred geometry as an introduction. I got Voices in the First Day first. I read the whole thing. It was all up my alley with tracking and everything. And because I knew Robert wrote this other book, I picked it up as well. I looked through it and was like square root of 2, square root of 3, the workbook for square root of 5. That was all beyond me at that point. So I actually put it down for a long time and would just thumb through it. But I didn't do too well at geometry in school or mathematics in general. So it wasn't something that I had a real pattern language for. But I did keep going in the field and exploring tracking. So now fast forward like 30 years and I'm at a beach with my son and we're going to a cafe, and all of a sudden I'm at this playground with him and we're looking at, this is a column here on the left, and these are little holes that are up a grate behind me, and this light shined through and hit this column, and the refraction of the light going through that created this dot and like circle pattern. Now, if you look at it, you can kind of see that is the flower of life hexagonal pattern there, right? You could make out the circles going around, the black centroids going around, and these little rays of light that are creating it. That was all just created from the sunlight going through these holes on this column.
George,
Yes.
it doesn't, that the column picture there of where your cursor isn't actually clear. Is it supposed to be fuzzy, or is it clear?
It's fuzzy. Yeah, it's fuzzy because it's just the way the light is bouncing off the column.
Just
Yeah,
checking. Thanks.
that's kind of what it looked like. But, as I studied it, I could see what the overall circle pattern was on the hexagonal pattern. So
Yeah, wild.
this is my first drawing in sacred geometry right here on the right. So later that day, I went with my son to this little cafe, and they got this brown paper sheet, kids can draw on. So my son's looking at me like, "What are you doing?" Well, I take the cup, and I put it in the middle, and I start trying to draw out what I saw earlier in the day. And this is what I came up with. And I had seen this type of image before. I never tried to draw it, and I colored it in like this. So, I did the seed of life and this pattern just with the cup, right? And we didn't even save it. We just left it on there, but I have the photograph of it. And so this is how easy it is to get into sacred geometry. You don't really know when your like calling is to pick it up. And for me, it was this, although I had an interest in it before, but I got super excited that day. And that night I picked up a compass and started drawing. So then, I mean, Meredith, you feel free to jump in, but now we're getting to the nuts and bolts of this. So that's just a little background with the tracking, and just one little experience that kind of got me excited to pick up the compass was that sequence. Now, of course, entering into sacred geometry, as many of you probably do, this may be one of the first things you come across is the 5 platonic solids, the building blocks of creation. And Metatron's Cube at the time, Drunvalo was one of the first few books, Drunvalo Melchizedek's book, The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life, laid out this scenario here, right? Draw the circles, the 13 circles, you connect the lines, you get Metatron's cube, octahedron, icosahedron, tetrahedron, dodecahedron, right? So, I started working with that, and I found that I only really drew ever was just octahedron, tetrahedron, and cube. They all made sense in terms of I could see how one was nested in the other, they fit, I could build it out bigger, I could go smaller, fractally inside, I could do so much with those three. And I was like, I don't really know what to do with these two. I didn't understand how they fit in, right? So I had to start the research just a little bit more to start to draw them and figure out more about it. And just there was something a little off there, and I just couldn't see the connection, right? So as a pattern seeker, I just kept going, going. But I did discover eventually, and I'll show you why, that these two forms, icosahedron and dodecahedron, were not contained in this drawing design of Metatron's cube. And that was a really big shocker for me because, it's really shared often that this was the pattern itself, this line drawing would. So I need to describe why, okay? So we're gonna get into that. Meredith, any questions you want me just to keep going along?
Oh, I want you to just keep on going. Yeah, it's great.
Okay, so this is just the basics to start from, right? So I've extracted the drawing of the dodecahedron from Metatron's cube here, and I'm just going to compare that before we do any line drawings or show you more of the process of discovery. Here's the drawing of this, and basically and this one on the right is based on a 1 to 1.6 ratio, right? And what do I mean by that? Well, this back edge of the pentagon face that is angled, right? It's sloping away from you, right? Because you're looking at it three-dimensionally. If that were 1, the distance from this black node to this black node over here would be 1.618. And if I do that on Metatron's cube, this is 1. And then if I do it across this length, same lengths, that would be 2. So 1 to 2 ratio really does a major distortion to this form in a way that doesn't allow it to work with the rest of the nested structural forms, particularly the other platonic solids.
I do want to say one thing. Do you mind if I just say one thing?
Yeah, of course, please.
Is that it reminds me so much of, I had the privilege of going to Egypt in October. And, and I've never really, it's pyramids, yeah, cool, whatever. It's when you're standing there and really understanding or trying to understand what it's all about, it was sinking in a lot more. And what's remarkable is that it's 13 acres at the base, the Great Pyramid, the main one. And it's only off at the top by less of 1/10 of a degree to true north. And if you had these massive, massive things at the bottom off by a fraction of anything, it never would come up to the top. So the idea of as soon as you have the smallest thing that's wrong at the bottom, it goes way, way off by the time it gets to the top. And so these differences that George is talking about actually make a monumental difference as you start going into what it actually means in the larger picture.
Yes, and that's it. Because it is a holistic pattern that we're dealing with. Everything is interconnected here to everything else. And that's what sacred geometry keeps reinforcing over and over again. And I learned more about that once I made this change, because before I said I couldn't really go anywhere. I was a little locked in this pattern. But once I saw how this was interconnected with everything else, which you'll see in a moment, it all clicked, everything clicked. And then I was ready to enter into a more geometric freedom, within that. But one little angle, like you're saying, is a huge difference. Now, you asked me like, well, how different are they if you lay one over top of the other? Like, are we talking just like a little bit? Well, no, I don't believe that's a little bit,
Yeah.
right? Because, I tried to scale them to the back edge being roughly the same, but look at how that nose dives down in the front.
And the
Now,
pentagons even don't look normal on the Metatron's cube dodecahedron.
no, they don't. And you'll see more illustrations of this because I like to show it in many different ways as possible. Because, like I say, once you see this and really understand the nuts and bolts, you can't unsee it after a while.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to also illustrate that this drawing is documented and it was discovered by Drunvalo Melchizedek and written about in his book. And he described the process of discovery was, with a student of his, because he was trying to find how to draw the dodecahedron in that pattern for over 20 years, he says. This is, almost verbatim what he says in the book. Until he was working with a student and they had to figure out where the missing lines were. Drunvalo couldn't figure out where this edge line connection was. So the student was like, hey, why don't you just connect those two lines? And he did, and he was like, hey, that looks like the dodecahedron. And that's really where the discovery came from. So we're not looking at something that came from ancient Egypt. This isn't like so far back, right? But in 40 years, because roughly that was when the book was printed, that's the best estimate I can go off of, roughly, or whenever the discovery was, somewhere in there within his lifetime, this has become the most popular sacred geometry, dodecahedron, and all that iconography that you'll see everywhere, right? And my feeling has always been like, okay, well, it's getting people excited about sacred geometry and getting them interested, which is awesome. Yet in the future, if we want a young person, let's say, and I'll talk more about this, to be like, hey, I really want to enter into this and I want to draw that dodecahedron. If they start to work with this, they'll have limitations. If they work with something like this, that might open them up expansively in a way to see different interconnections than they might ever see than being working with this. So it has a bigger cultural influence that we might not see because this is a curriculum we're working with here, really. Sacred geometry is one of the quadrivium or geometries, right?
Yeah.
So this
you might want to explain quadrivium to people.
Yeah, the quadrivium is like the ancient classical studies of astronomy, geometry, music, and what was the other one? Planetary motions. I believe those are the three, but those are four. So the quadrivium is these four areas of study, and geometry is a big one. So in geometry, as other geometers explore this subject, through Wikipedia or HMS Coxeter or any scientific study that uses looking at the geometry of quasicrystals, and they show potential looks of quasicrystals and what they might look like, these are the images they're showing on this dodecahedron on the right? So it has scientific value more than just artistic and creative, but it's both. And that's the beauty of the bridge between art and science and spirituality. These are all connected. This would be more art and spirituality at this point, but it's not making the bridge to science. The dodecahedron and icosahedron are the phi ratio forms. But all the, the cube and the tetrahedrons and octahedrons, like Nassim is working with, that all's good. Like that all works, you know what I mean? But with this, it's a different story, okay, for science.
You also said you also related to a quasicrystal. Can you define that for people as well?
Well, quasicrystals are kind of a recent discovery. And in fact, the person who discovered quasicrystals only in the 80s, he was laughed out of the scientific community because crystalline structure up at that point in time was thought to only be hexagonal based and cubic, just like Metatron's cube, basically, right? So he discovered the golden ratio and quasi-crystal structures having golden ratio pentagon stars, basically, pentagrams or pentagons in crystalline structure. And the first way it was discovered was that areas that had a huge amount of intensive pressure and heat to get that type of structure. So the first few were found at like atomic bomb explosions or a meteorite from outer space that was dated back to like early time in our history that landed on Earth had quasi-crystalline structure because it was like from a star imploding or something like that, reorganized the whole structure of the crystalline structure matrix into a quasi-crystal structure.
So that makes it that you're saying that the quasi crystals, because it's a term I'm not really 100% clear on, and I keep hearing about it too. You're saying that they are in really proper phi ratio form, or they're not?
No, they are. Like I'll show you a form in a little bit called rhombic tricontahedron. It looks like this.
Uh-huh.
These quasi-crystals take on this geometric structure. So scientists and artists like Roger Penrose, for instance, would make tiling patterns out of this type of thing to see like how quasi-crystalline structure will replicate itself. Because tetrahedrons and hexagon structures, they make nice tiling patterns, but this type of structure is a different story. But it's in crystalline structure, these quasi-crystal structures. And that's why the scientist, I'm forgetting his last name, was really laughed out of the scientific community. They called him a quasi-scientist because it was like so there's no such thing as quasi-crystals, or there's no such thing as pentagon structure in crystals at all. But he had to rewrite the science books basically to integrate this approach. Not him, but the scientific community did have to rewrite the book.
And that explains more to me when I see tiling patterns that they talk about, why that's important, because I've never really understood that. So thank you.
Yeah. Yes, that's all trying to get to the root of trying to understand this golden matrix structure that supports this quasi-crystalline structure, because it is not just it's not just geometric things on the paper. I mean, it's an actual part of the universe, right? I mean, it exists. Oh, okay, so this is just a slide that's up here to help what my sort of breakthrough was to start to figure out how do I get from, this dodecahedron to this other golden ratio dodecahedron. Well, the simple solution was just add the golden ratio to the circle patterns. And that circle pattern, basically the blue circle to the red circle in this, is 1.618 to 1, right? And that was really all I did. And this is not like this isn't known, because there are other geometers like Robert Lawler in his book who shows a golden ratio pattern, or just two circles of blue and red circles to draw an icosahedron. That's really all you need, is just that, right? But I turned it into this type of pattern where I was just like, let's put it into the whole seed of life and show it all those golden ratio circles, blue, there's green and the red, right? All at the different levels there are all maintaining golden ratio proportion. And I started working with this pattern, and it just really blew me away, because all the forms that I was looking for, the dodecahedron and icosahedron, and all these stellations were all right in there, okay? So I started calling this the golden seed of life, one of my early discoveries from about 2 years ago. So this pattern taught me a ton. So here's the next example. So let's just go through some of these differences, right? We have, in the dodecahedron, there are 5 cubes. So hopefully everybody could see this little form here that I'm holding up. So each of these stars, now the dodecahedron, remember, it's got 12 pentagon faces, right? And the pentagram stars that I have on there, each one of these is a cube itself. So there are 5 cubes in this, and that's something that is never talked about in Metatron's cube, because the problem is that the 5 cubes, one of them, the one that's facing you, is severely distorted because of its distortions to its underlying golden ratio geometry. So what I've done is showing you here a cube Now, let me get a cube here so I could show you how we're looking at it. I'll use this piece of pyrite. So here's the face of the pyrite. Now, really, we're looking at the cube. If I just tilt it a little bit like this, right? So it's just angled down a bit, but that doesn't buckle this edge, right? That's still parallel to the other one. It's not like warped all of a sudden, right? So if I do that to that, it just goes along. And that's what's happening when you have the golden ratio here. So I've extracted one of the cubes to show you that this is going to be parallel edged, and these are going to be 6 faces. Two of the faces are flat to you, to the left and right. So you're just looking by them, right? This one here, you could see there is no possibility for parallel lines when you connect the dots. So what you get is a severely distorted face buckled cube. Now, as a resonance and a frequency, that doesn't feel good to me. I mean, you know, it like this, this cube is gonna, there's no possibility to build sacred geometry that's going to be interconnected off this cube. And the other ones are all.
Hey, George.
Yes, sir.
That cube looks like it fell off the back of a truck.
Okay. So this is one of the things that, yeah, it's like a box. If you got your package, your fancy crystal bowl, right? You got a crystal bowl. You're so excited to get this crystal bowl, and it comes in a square box. And the UPS delivery shows up, and your nice cube box carrying your crystal bowl shows up like this. You are not going to be happy because your crystal bowl in there is going to be smashed. But if your box shows up like this and you tilt it to the side, you're like, okay, my crystal bowl is all good. That's the difference, you know? So it'd be a bad delivery from UPS. So I don't know if that analogy works for you, but that's your truck falling off the comment makes me think of.
Can you just explain again, George, so Metatron's cube was created by Drinvalo? Is that what you're saying? Or like how did Metatron's cube get created? Like what was the mental inquiry that brought it about kind of idea? Like, was it really just Drinvalo who created it? Or I'm not clear on that.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I'm trying to do a lot of research on that to find that out. I'm quite certain, at least, that I know that version that I'm showing you of the dodecahedron here on the right sounds like that was created by him, written in his book, page 164, volume 1. So that is documented right there. Now, this design of like interconnecting lines in the 13 circles, that could have been around for a long time. And the oldest version or story that I hear about that is that Fibonacci, Leonardo Pisana, he was the one who created Metatron's cube, or is thought to be created this from sources on the website, right? On different websites. That's one of the stories that's out there. And he said that it contained all, you know, platonic solids, or I don't even know if he said that, but he said that because of this line design, he wanted to honor Metatron, so he called it Metatron's cube. Okay. So that was about 300 years ago.
I guess what confuses me is that when I look at the circles underlying them, it seems to me that all of the platonic solids would have to be able to be represented if the main 3 of the tetrahedron and the octahedron and the hexahedron were in there.
Well, they do, but there's going to be a transformation of how they're represented in terms of their orientation.
Why would that be? Is that too ridiculous a question?
No, but I think I'll be able to show you that, and I'll reiterate that when we get to those pictures, because I'm not saying that there's no in a cube. Wish I didn't have the pyrite one around. I'm not saying that in a cube there isn't those forms. They exist within the cube.
Yeah.
They just don't exist within this drawing. So in the cube, yes, they do exist. I have slides that will show that. And the reason why the form will look tilted from the basic structure. So just give me a minute on that. We'll get to that in a sec.
Thanks.
And I hope that gave you enough information about the history. It's not one that I have been able to get enough research on.
Well, the
that,
platonic solids too, I mean, they were found, nobody knows where those began either. You know, so there's Neolithic rocks that have been found from, I don't even know how many bazillion years ago.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Scottish solids from 3,000 years ago, at least they've been estimated at that.
Mhm.
Okay, well, this I already talked about. This is just a 1-to-2 measurement ratio. I'm just showing you what the actual values. I based this on a 1-inch circle, so we get different numbers, but if you divided 1.07 to 0.66, that would equal 1.618. So that would be the golden proportion. So we could say this is 1 to 1.618. This is divided in half, basically. 2.77, the front edge, to the back edge is just divided in half. Okay.
So basically they're doing the spheres without using the phi ratio within them. And if you do it without the phi ratio, then it's kind of like making the pyramid blocks like off at the bottom.
Yeah, well, the issue here that I've often say is that this is trying to base, Metatron's cube is all based on lines. Everything wants to be done with the line. So the circles are only really there to base your center point of where a line connects from one line to the next.
Mhm.
So that line segment, D to E here, actually ends at the center of this circle and the center of this circle.
Mhm.
And then they're just snipping it off. But you don't have anything that tells you where to snip it off. It has to be from another line.
Right,
This is the golden ratio is all about the circles. It
right.
doesn't have to be. I mean, I've got other designs where I could do it all lines too, but the way I entered into it was everything was about the circles interacting with lines together. And that would be the thing that creates the correct segmentation. So Drinvalo called this D to E here, the missing line. It was like the hunt for the missing line. He'd been looking for this missing line for 20 years. And the missing line was just the golden ratio circle division in the same, in a hexagonal pattern. You just
It
needed
makes so
golden
much more
ratio circles.
sense. Yeah, yeah.
So once you do that golden ratio circles, you make the proper division. So that segment is going to end right here and it's going to end right there. So it's a hexagon. I'm not showing you the full hexagon, but because that circle is oriented there, it's going to trim off that edge that you need, the proper golden ratio division, because that line that I don't have is divided into the golden proportion. This line is divided into thirds. All right. So if I had the whole hexagon here, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 3 equal parts. That's what that pattern does. This would be divided into 1.618, 1. And that's a huge difference, right? Because now all of a sudden you're getting into 1.618. Here you're getting thirds and halves because you're working with whole numbers. And that's what this 13 circle pattern does really well, is work with whole number divisions easily, unless you want to work outside of that a little bit, right? And try to move your lines around. But this circle pattern or line pattern known as Metatron's cube, this one here is completely based on that, those divisions of halves and thirds. This whole line is divided into fifths. So it's very cool. I mean, it's so much cool ratios and portions and thirds and halves and fifths, but golden ratio operates under different rules than that. You know, and we had to figure out how to integrate these two sets of rules together to come up with a pattern that would work with both. And this is where we get into the reason behind this, is it really has to do with now how we're going to build the form out. Okay, so this is talking about stellation of the form. And when I try to work with Metatron's cube on doing the stellation of the form, so a stellated form, well, let me just run and get the stellated dodeca. It's right over there. This is the stellated dodecahedron. Okay, so in this is that dodecahedron, and I'm making these pentagon-shaped 5-sided pyramids off of each of the 12 faces. So I'm coming up with this cool star, and you're looking at it like this. Now, there's a difference right away when I try to stellate this Metatron's cube dodecahedron. You can notice that I can only operate with this triangle because that's the center of those circles, whereas this one is a bigger triangle, right? And I'll show you the next slide just where this is going so I don't lose viewers on this. this straight edge, because now a stellated dodecahedron turns into an icosahedron, right? So that's the 20-sided platonic solid, which is this one here. All right, so this guy stellated, if I connect all these points, you'll get 20 faces. Now this is going to show us how like expansive geometry and the fractal nature of phi ratio works between these, because I could stellate this into this pattern, which is stellating off of that, and that creates another dodecahedron. And then this one, of course, stellate on and on and on. I'll show you a slide of that in a second. But this is the key point between the difference. Yes, what was that? I didn't hear you.
I was just going to say that information that you just casually shared was from what we've been told would warrant death in Pythagorean times and in Pythagoras' school, because it was very heretical, because the whole nature of understanding things expanding into infinity and out of infinity was very much against, I guess it was Aristotelian law, science that became very connected to the church. And so if you shared that idea, if you shared these secrets within the geometry that really is a philosophy, it would be punishable by death, because it would threaten the entire Pythagorean group of people.
Yes, well, their symbol was the pentagram. So they knew all about this type of fractal expansion, although Pythagoras himself did not like irrational numbers.
Right.
He liked basing everything on whole numbers. So I don't know how he reconciled that issue with the pentagram star, being the foundation of one of the main symbols. But what I'm sharing here, and you'll see in a moment, people who are familiar with Dan Winter's work in terms of his fractal expansion of the dodeca-icosa stellation process, he calls, and I have a slide of that in a moment. I realized that everything I had drawn is showing his star mother model, show you in a few slides, was showing that. And it really came down to this golden circle ratio pattern to do it. Now, visually, this is the key point. See how this is an equilateral triangle when I just go straight line, the big blue triangle in the middle. And then I got another equilateral triangle in the middle of that. A icosahedron itself is not an equilateral triangle. See, it has to bend here on the page and in real life too, when you look at it, to show essentially that it is not a flat surface, right? So this is a flat surface. So let me show you the next slide. This is if I took Metatron cube icosahedron, because mostly we've been talking about the dodecahedron, and I hold it to you like this. This is geometrically, I think if you ask any geometer in the world, or even maybe anybody who doesn't even know anything about geometry, do you think that this triangle is flat? They probably would say it's probably flat. And if this one is flat inside it, well, it would just be like this. I mean, an equilateral triangle is Euclid's first drawing in the elements, right? So this is like the most basic thing you can get. So here's an equilateral triangle. We put another equilateral triangle. Now this is the icosahedron. This is the big one. Like the dodecahedron, I could see where there'd be issues about, but this one, I could see why people could see it as a dodecahedron. But this one is an octahedron, right? Because if you have a flat triangular face and you draw a line here, here, and here, then you're basically doing an octahedron and drawing these additional lines on it, right?
Yeah.
Because this is an 8-sided triangular sheet, and all you've done is drawn a line and put another one in there. So that is like, once you see this, and you can't, I feel you can't unsee that. Because every time I see this, any post of anything that shows platonic solids and it has this, I just look at the icosahedron and I'm like, ooh, because this is supposed to be a pentagon face, like this is supposed to be a pentagon underneath there that should look like a pentagon. This looks like where'd the tip go? It's just like smushed.
Yeah.
So there's just a really big distortion to that one. But see, it's related. The underlying geometry is related to the stellation of the dodecahedron underneath it. And this is the golden ratio version of the icosahedron. And you see that you take a pentagram and you have to tilt it so the proportions of that in 2D drawing, that is, they maintain, just like you're opening or closing a door, right? This width, unless you're doing a perspective drawing, isn't going to change much. It's not going to change at all. It's just going to be like, this is the same red lines as this, they're just angled back. And that helps maintain all the proportionality that you need to work with the other geometric structures and forms. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a basic overview. There are other tests that I would do throughout many of my videos to show. I don't want to get into them too much, because it's just more description of the same thing, of me showing different ways of why that's true. I think this image here may be better, just looking at the icosahedron, because here's a zone tool, right? So these are little models I build with to make forms sometimes. Well, here's an equilateral triangle inside an equilateral triangle, totally flat. Now I'm building an icosahedron with actual model struts, right? This will make is just a portion of a true form. And you can see it's already bent, right? It's not a straight line.
Yeah,
This
totally.
is a straight line. So this is a real big issue in that drawing. And if I draw a pentagon, which would be that tilted pentagon, see how these lines are straight? But if I do it for this one, you see how they angle like this? So it's showing you another distortion in the phi ratio. So if you correct one of them, you have to correct both. It's not like you can just say, oh, well, the icosahedron is the only one that's off drastically. It's like the both are underlyingly structurally connected. So you can't just do the obvious one like this and say that dodecahedron is still good, you know?
That really brings up the point of what we were talking about, you know, the idea of having a geometry that's valid and one that's not. And I keep saying, you know, it has to stand up to all the different perspectives or angles. And this is bringing that really to light, to see that, as you say, you can't just change the one thing and then expect the rest of it to all work out. Everything has to kind of lock into place and stand up to being geometrically correct, no matter how you're looking at it. And if it doesn't, and one little thing is out, then it kind of throws off the balance of the whole geometry itself.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because and no matter how you look at it is the key point. Because right now I'm just showing everything from the hexagon perspective, right? Because I teach people to draw in my drawings how to draw the same dodecahedron, not just from a hexagon view, but from this edge view, right? And from the pentagon view.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like, there's no issue in the drawings there. So it would be like hexagon and square view, pentagon and square view. So why would I get the hexagon view and then all of a sudden it doesn't work? It's like all of those have to work. So I can rotate this object around and into other views, and those golden proportions that I'm describing are going to be the unifying link between this. So why all of a sudden in sacred geometry, when I go to this flower of life, fruit of life, all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore? It shouldn't be like that. It should be like, hey, if I rotate this to this, it's the same. And if I rotate it one more notch to this pentagon, it still works. See, the golden proportion is going to be from here to there to there. All of the drawings add up. So that's when, like I said, I'm like jamming more like a musician, because I have a pattern language that is not locked into one view anymore. I can experiment with different, that's like going to a different genre of music and taking the skills you have when you learn the pentagon view. You have this skill set of golden ratio geometry. You have this skill set of golden ratio geometry, and then all of a sudden you go over to a different view and you can't play the music anymore. Like everything you learn doesn't work anymore in hexagon.
Right. Like a pentatonic scale has to fit in with all of the other scales, or you can't make music.
Exactly. So you have a basic foundation to work from, and that turned out to be the golden ratio. Because my first discovery of working with those circles wasn't in hexagon view, it was in square view. And then I said, hey, it works here. Let me see what happens if I do it with this golden seed of life, or the seed of life. I was like, shoot, it did it. That's all I needed was those circles. So I came to it from a different view and kind of reverse engineered it rather than trying to find it in here. So, but that's because as a tracker, I'm constantly looking at things from multiple perspectives, literally on the ground. You know, if you can see something from one angle, you've got to go to a different angle to look at it to see if you get more information. And each of those views are so important to learning sacred geometry because they each contain different information to the whole, right? You've heard that parable of like one person's holding like the elephant and you have the 5 Indian sages and one person's holding the leg, another one's got the tail and the lights are off in the room, right? Another one's got the trunk and they're all describing something different, right? No, I think it's a snake, you know, and the other person's like, no, it feels like a tree bark, you know, it feels like a tree trunk. And all of a sudden they turn the lights on and they're like, holy smokes, it's at one elephant. And that's what this dodecahedron is, or any of these forms. It's like different ways to look at it, to change our view and perspective of this form in a unified type of way. Now, if you're an artist or perspective drawing, have fun, do whatever you want. But in terms of the way that I like to work with the pattern language that helps maintain proportionality, and I can turn this into art, for me, I like the combo of the science art bridge there for myself.
Absolutely.
Um,
My brain is buzzing. That's another thing that I love about, you know, it's just such mental gymnastics. I think that everybody should be studying this from a young age because it makes your mind work in ways that are so much more cohesive, getting both sides of the brain working, but just as an exercise, like when I was little playing that memory game where you have to turn up one thing and you know, it's a B and you have to find the B in the other one and you have to remember where it was. And it's kind of like that on steroids when you're working with geometry. And often when people get in touch with me, I'll hear a lot of excitement. They'll be because they start to see the pattern and and it just responds in the system. And they'll be like, it's like everything's connected. It's like, oh my God. And there's just this excitement that happens because the brain is firing and relating. And so I love having these conversations because it just makes my brain continually learn and work. And I know your program is going to be amazing. So we'll definitely let people know about that before we're finished.
Totally. Yeah, I definitely got a few slides discussing that at the end, and especially the kid factor. And some of these designs are not so complex to get you to the same point. I'm going to point a few of those out too. I'll zip through this. This is kind of the meat nut, you know, the nuts and bolts of it. This is just, I just rotated the form so we could look at this again, because sometimes when you rotate the form, you could see it a little different. So anyway, this is the distorted cube that I said when your Amazon package of your crystal bowl gets smashed. And this is the one where it shows up nicely with the dodecahedron envelope around it. Okay, but this is getting back to an earlier question that you mentioned. Like, how is it contained in the cube, right? Because I'm not saying that a dodecahedron cannot be found in a cube structurally, right? But the difference is, remember how I said that one of the forms has to be tilted to the side? And what I'm illustrating here on the right is you have to look at this like that this blue edge is going along. Like if we divided the cube into 4 small boxes, they're going to look like diamonds, right? Because it's a sloping cube face, right? So this is a cube, okay? 1 face, 2 face, 3 faces. The other 3 faces are behind it, right? These are the edges. And right in the center of that face is this blue line, right? And it's parallel to the outer lines.
It
and then
looks
when
like
I go down
golden
here,
spiral. It looks like 2 golden spiral boxes put together to me. That
yeah,
even
it could be. We probably could find the golden spiral in there. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
because the blue line's kind of dividing the cube into the halves, which then would create the whole Fibonacci sequence. That's what I'm seeing. I don't know if that's true.
All right. Well, that's a trail to follow. That's that's a trail to follow. You know, the blue. So the blue edges are in contact with that face. This is right on the surface of the face, and this is on the surface of the face, and this is on the surface of the face.
Yeah.
So if we took this dodecahedron and put it in a box, we'd have 3 of the edges and the back 3 edges touching each of those faces of the cube. And this golden circle pattern that I described showed me how to do this. It showed me how to reverse the drawing so that it would fit in the cube or be facing you straight on. It can do both. Now, when we try to put this in the cube, right, this is where I'm saying it's a disconnected geometry from the large cube, the same big hexagonal geometry. It's going off of these lines, but then it's like, well, where's this edge in relationship to being in a cube? There's no relationship there at all. It's not showing you that it's in the cube.
Got it.
It's just saying it's in this design, and it's not even in the design as I'm showing, but that's what it's showing. And here's the one with the icosahedron. I can do the same thing. These red lines, they're in contact with the faces. So 6 of the edges here are in contact, which means these blue lines are kind of sloping down into the cube. So all these are on the face of the cube, right? So there you go. There's the icosahedron in the cube. No issues here. New circle pattern does it nicely, really easy. Here we are. Wait a second. Where's the edge? I'm looking for an edge like parallel to this one, right? Because that's what we should be looking for, a parallel edge. Still not there. So these 2 forms, and this was my initial reaction to it of why I said, I didn't know how to work with these 2 forms. I just did cubes and tetrahedrons and built all the icosahedron, the octahedron, and like all the geometry that worked with this was so easy to work with. I did gazillion drawings, but I left these 2 golden ratio forms. I was like, ew, I'm a little like, I don't know what to do with them. But now I do, right? Now I understand how it fits together through all that journey of asking questions.
Beautiful.
Okay, I'm going to zip through a lot of these because basically this is like what happened in early phases of that discovery. Like I said, cube octahedron, rhombic dodecahedron, like all these fit into this geometry perfectly. Metatron's cube. When I started working with this pattern, all the stellated forms came out. Kepler, these are 5 regular stellated forms. I'll show you another picture of those. 4D forms. This is a 4D dodecahedron. 600 cell, another 4D icosahedron.
Okay, wait a second, slow down. What, can you just determine what a 4D dodecahedron is?
Well, the 4th dimension is the next dimension beyond 3rd dimension.
Yeah.
So in the 3rd dimension, we have an X, Y, and Z axis. The 4th dimension is like a mathematically derived dimension, but some people feel there is a 4th dimension that, you know, exists with our 3rd dimension on a geometric level. Some people call the 4th dimension time, right? But in geometric language, the 4th dimension would actually mean you take the X, Y, and Z axis of 3 dimensions, and you add one more dimension line that's going to be perpendicular to each and every single one of those other lines. It's a dimension we can't grasp in our minds, but we can depict some of the forms that would be generated from a reality that exists like that.
I'm just going to bring that also back into the conversation that we had about the Kabbalic star shape in our last talk, because I'm sure we were talking as well about the idea that that form actually shows, to me, a different dimensional shift. It's leading a direction of a dimensional shift, as we were talking about, when you look at it and you can see in the not the IVM, in the vector equilibrium, that you could see that the same shape was there, and it was actually a hexagonal shape turned to its side, and yet it could still be a whole 3D shape to itself. And so to me, it's speaking to dimensional shift. So when I hear 4D, that's what I think of too. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's where my mind goes with it.
It does. I mean, when you really start to study these line patterns, like you did in discovery of your form too, and when I was looking at your form, it's like these lines are not really set in stone. Just because you draw the line doesn't mean it always is what you think it is. Just because someone has said this is a cube or this is an icosahedron or whatever, right? If you study it long enough, you'll be able to see that there are other forms in there that relate in different ways. So it's
and that you have to see it from turning it kind of in all directions, and that includes dimensionally as well. It has so much in geometry. There is just so much. It shows they're like wormholes to me.
Yep. Yeah, and our labeling in that process gets in the way. So, you know, just like suspending the labeling of calling something we think it's a cube, for instance. Well, it can actually turn into be holding a different shape within it of the same looking lines, right? We don't know how far that cube goes up or down because it's only 2D. I can extend that all the way like this or make it flat. So there's a lot of dimensions along that continuum, a variety of different forms that might be presented in there.
Yeah.
Okay, so but anyway, basically that slide is just saying a lot of stuff happened in terms of my expansion of sacred geometry. This one is just about the dodecahedron. These are all correct versions. Well, I don't want to say correct, but they're the ones that hold the golden proportion, right? They're all the same. They all hold the same angles. And once I knew what that looked like, I could then discover it in all the beautiful ways that it can be found, right? Because all these different circle patterns that you see here are just many different ways to come to the same realization. So it's like, then that showed me like, oh, there's a dodecahedron somewhere on this blank page that holds up the eternal, from this view of it, this eternal sacred proportions to it, regardless of how I get to it, right? I wasn't stuck to one way of doing it. There are many ways to do it, but it always came back to the same results, sometimes nested in each other 3 times, you know, some more complicated than others. I was able to make a cluster of 20 dodecahedron out of one dodecahedron. These are 20 that make one big one, right? And that was all because the angles were correct. Because this little dodecahedron you see here had to have the correct angle to fit into the larger one it was connected to, right? So that, and here's the one with the one in the face. So I don't know, lots of, this slide really made me like, holy smokes, you really went into the deep end of dodecahedron.
You brainiac, you. I love it.
And it's, you know, it's so much like it is Brainiac, but at the same time, I don't even know that I might be on the route to discovering that, you know, it's like, because I start to get the ability to see it, then all of a sudden the intuition, the new part comes over. It's like, whoa, there it is. It just emerges sometime. Like this morning, I have a new one, new dodecahedron drawing from this morning. I didn't even know it was going to happen. I wasn't even looking for it. And it said, here I am again.
So do you just get up in the morning and you just start drawing? I mean, is that kind of like other people have coffee and you grab your compass? I mean, it sounds like that's how you function in the world, because you're always coming out with new videos and new things, and it blows my mind.
Yeah, I try to, but sometimes I'll take a break for a little while because you need to process things and let things go into the subconscious. In fact, the one I had was that I discovered this morning was from a dream I had about it. And then I came up and did it.
Yeah.
So
it reminds me a lot of when I'm talking to people about stretch, you know, and the whole somatic stretch that I do, that you get to a point that instead of telling your body what to do, you begin to just surrender enough that you can have the body lead you. And then it starts to unravel tensions and show you inner patterns, which is how all the geometry showed up for me. And it's the same sort of idea, like you're just being led by the geometry as opposed to trying to figure it out. It's like this beautiful synthesis between the left and right sides of the brain, really, of just, and letting the geometry dance you.
exactly, yes. And that's why I add the new part to it, because I'm not looking to make new NEW discoveries all the time. I'm just allowing them to unfold for me. And the more I become educated through the actual geometry speaking to me, you know, through all this pattern language speaking to me, I can converse more with it and understand where the connections are, because it's showing me different patterns.
Annette is, sorry, just to, before I forget, Annette is asking, are the drawings generated by hand or a program?
All these drawings you see here are all hand done, but I do a lot of them on the iPad because it's faster. And then I transfer those drawings. So the iPad is with a pencil and a stylus and making circles. It's how in my classes, I usually am drawing on the iPad and showing people how to do it, because I can do a lot of cool stuff, like showing different teachable moments on that. And then I always discover like if I'm doing a really complex hand-drawn line drawing with lots of lines, I discover how to make it more simplified so that I could hand draw it. So it's not computer generated in like I put in a sequence for the computer to follow. I mean, I'm as if I were drawing it by hand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then you use a program that allows you to basically match up, you know, the mathematics of things to do it as specifically as you would normally do with it with a compass and pencil kind of idea. Yeah.
Yes. And normally what I do there is like if I need to test something, because the program I have for drawing by hand doesn't give me the edge lengths, I have to go to GeoGebra, which is a popular, you know, drawing software that gives me the angle measurements and the actual precise values. So when it, you know, comes to nuts and bolts to make sure I really got something, I'll transfer my knowledge over to that drawing software that I had to learn how to figure out to do, and then draw it there and reproduce it. So it's a kind of few step process, but I love to make the drawings, bring it back to, you can do this, right? Like you can do this. This is not some complicated thing, but my workflow is really easy on the iPad, right? It's just so easy for me to feel like I'm actually drawing. So I use that technology to my advantage. Okay, so this pattern here, this little layout here we're seeing is based on Dan Winter's stellation of the dodecahedron and icosahedron. Dan and I did a video together about this drawing in particular, and I have another one that I did and about this this process. So in the octahedron is the tetrahedron, and then you take two tetrahedrons, you put them together, you get the star tetrahedron. This is a very symbol, right? That we see in sacred geometry a lot. You connect two of those together, you know, the lines, the 12 edges, you get the cube. So you have your cube. Now this dodecahedron, I'm showing just one cube. This cube, excuse me, is in the dodecahedron, right? Just one of them, just like I showed before. Each of these lines on this face are one cube. So there are really 5 of these going on. There's 5 tetrahedron in there, 10 tetrahedron in there, 5 octahedron in this dodecahedron. But once you get to that point, all the platonic solids, or at least these 3, are here. Then we stellate the dodecahedron, right? Which I showed you here in this model. Connect the vertices, icosahedron. Stellate the icosahedron. Then you come up with this one. Create stellated dodecahedron. Then you create a dodecahedron. Then you stellate that to this one again, right? But it's the next golden ratio octave up, right? But at that point, all your other forms, octahedron, tetrahedron, and all those, they're always contained in the cube times 5, right? Because there's 5 in this all the time. So then you get into this expansive geometry of implosion, that he calls it, which looks a little bit like this. So icosahedron, dodecahedron, icosahedron, dodecahedron, icosahedron, dodecahedron, until you get further down till you can go infinitely. And this is where the Pythagoreans will come after me, I guess, because I'm talking about that infinite implosive spot that is infinity, really, right? So this is all based on hand drawing. I'm just deleting the lines. And at some point with the pencil, you'll never get to go that far. But on my iPad, I have a video where I zoom into this and I just keep going and going and going as you're passing through geometric layers and circles zipping by you like you're going down the tunnel of geometry. So anyway, I do that from 4 different views, or 3 different views in that video. So anyway, so basically this can go to like Dan Winter level science, which has complicated drawings that go with it, and talk about implosion like Schauberger talked about, and other people looking for free energy technology in Dan Winter's work, to this simple pattern that I love. I call it the sprouting seed of life up on the top, because it basically is 6 circles with 6 larger circles, the same, double the diameter around it. And I can create all platonic solids just from that. So it's the kid version, right? This is the one that you could teach every little kid because it only takes 13 circles with no golden ratio division or cut, but it produces the golden ratio magically. And there we go, nesting of the the forms all together, all in one simple version. So this is a recent video that I did, so you could check out the details of that one. But this is really what you currently see everywhere else, as I'm saying. But to me, some version of this that shows, like the interrelationships and the wholeness may be what you see everywhere else in the future. Hopefully, that's my plan. And here's some young geometers. So I did that video, new geometer, had a big family gathering, and he all of a sudden was like, hey, let's do some geometry. He's an apprentice of mine in the past. Busts out the pads. He had all these kids drawing all those little sprouting seed of life patterns. Look at the icosahedron, this right here. It's got that little bend in it. Different colorful circle patterns. Here's the artistic side. This pattern actually contains all those other forms. You'd never know it. Here's one with the icosahedron. So that's just super exciting to me, like that this is so simple for kids to get into, and also teach them the basic roots of some of this Platonic solid geometry. It's like the basic block that these kids build with. Everybody gives a kid a cube, right? Well, now we can really work with it in different ways and make it very accessible. So
I just have to say that, I mean, I really hope, and I feel like this will be a little bit a part of my future, is working in the level of education. I mean, the fact that young people can grasp this and play with it so much, it crafts a brain. And it forces the brain to recognize pattern and recognize the fractal nature of something. Philosophically and sociopolitically, that changes how we function on the planet. You can't, mind you, even in geometry, I remember there's people who believe that everything's about the hexa, and other people that believe everything's about the penta. And sometimes a lot of arguments, with all these kind of concepts around it, but ultimately it's creating division where there's really no division. And so when we get past our human need to kind of hold on to one thing and have it be so, and have young minds really learn how everything is actually evolving, patterning everything, it stops division from being something that is seen first. And in today's issues politically and what's going on, and just they've always been, I mean, geometry is such to me, like a spiritual tool to teach me how everything is connected to everything else. So when you do that, you can't harm the earth as much or harm other people as much. It forces me to work on my own shit on a regular basis, because it's asking me to look at what's the larger picture. You're angry about this, but what's the umbrella pic? Look bigger. Where's the solution? It gets you to think differently. And I'm not saying I do it perfectly, but I do wish that I was taught to think this way from a young age. I just got excited and had to share that. Sorry.
Well, no, that's beautiful. I really appreciate that. I love that. I think it's really important, as you could see. I feel certainly passionate about it. I feel like I enter into this geometric terrain to produce different types of geometry for different types of age groups. And like I said, I really love this pattern, because you would be amazed how simple this is. You don't even have to draw one line. You just make a circle, make the other circles. The only lines you draw are just starting to make the forms. It's like so user friendly. And that might lead a kid to wanting to explore, the other elements of sacred geometry, but it is life changing. It definitely is, that those kids in the other picture there have done that. Look at all the smiles on every single one of their faces with this awesome artwork they produce.
Yeah, totally.
That's what I said. It's part of the curriculum. It's not just like on the pattern that contains everything in the universe. And like, this is what we teach now, just this. There's lots of ways to engage with this, right? This is not all 5 Platonic solids are found in this. Deal's over. We got it. We don't need anything else. We need to keep advancing, keep looking more. That's what I'm constantly doing, and discovering different ways to go about. So maybe the same thing ultimately, but it's the journey that you're on that is what's teaching you, right? It's not where you end up at. So it's hugely important. So, there's little seeds in all these, there's seeds in these patterns. Like you said earlier, they're ancient patterns and ancient techniques that, carry something for each of these kids probably that's going to resonate with them and whoever engages with this material, whether you're a kid or young person or not.
Yeah.
Anyway, I could do these star tests.
Quadrivium back.
Excuse me.
We need
Is
to
that
bring the quadrivium back.
Yes, yes, this is a huge part of it. And this, so basically it's that same circle pattern, just doing some of the star polyhedra. So you could get expansive with those. This is talking about just, when I discovered the golden circles, I was able to do all the star polyhedra. So this is what Kepler and Poinsot discovered. I mean, this is where the genius, these are like genius type people. I'm not. I just go in and find this type of stuff. Other people are going to do this more than I am, but you got to work with the techniques that are going to help produce this type of thing. And here it is from the 4 different perspectives of the 4 regular star polyhedra. Now, in sacred geometry, when I first got into it, if you asked me what the 4 regular star polyhedra were, I would be like, sorry, no idea. I know a star tetrahedron, right? Like that would be the limit of my ability to understand these star patterns and how they work. Automatically, the next step, once I understood the dodecaicosal, like let's say that was cleared up for me, and I was like, oh, well, this is a stellation. Like it wasn't so hard to go from this to this. And then it wasn't so hard to do any of these. So I did all these in a week from every view of the same form because it all made sense. And this is where the golden ratio circle pattern, you see them in all the circle patterns, are the same, right? The golden ratio circles are producing each of them.
Mhm.
This is what you're saying, hexapenta division. Well, yeah, there is a big division when you don't put golden ratio circles into the hexagon pattern, because then you won't have access to these forms.
Mhm.
Because this, you have to put them in. Like if you're going to draw this, this is like, you have to do this. You have to have these circles for the pentagon view. But I said, what happens if you take something from pentagon view and put it into hexagon view? And that's when the hexagon view came to life and produced what was being produced in the pentagon view. So there isn't a division there. There's a lot more unity there. And for people to explore that, insights I think will come through working with this type of pattern.
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't want to, because I know anyway. So, and we can talk about this another time, but this idea from penta to hexa, or from the 5 to the 6, it seems to me, because I've got a much more simplified version of the way I look at geometry. It's kind of like the difference in the musical scale between like the B and the C sort of thing, like you've got a tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, but there's this jump, and that I didn't understand that music was divided into a certain way to give us the scale that we have as we look at it, and that there's actually a whole bunch of other ways that you can look at frequency and sound and have those be the scale if you wanted to. And so that's where the geometry and the music mirror each other so much. But there's this jump somehow between the 5 and the 6 in there in geometry. There's like, it seems like it's different, and there's a gap between the two. That's the simplest way I could put it now, but am I incorrect in saying that?
Well, there are some differences. I mean, I feel like I've smoothed that out in working with geometry for myself, right?
Right,
Like,
but without your smoothing, because I'm
Yeah.
seeing what you're doing. Without your smoothing, there is like a gap where like the hexa would, or the penta would never fit into the hexa. It just, everything else fits, but those kind of like have a
I would
bump.
show you this drawing. I forgot to put it in here. But this little girl over here up here, she's showing a pentagon right in the middle of her drawing. And this is based on a hexagon layout. So I can draw it right in the heart of a hexagon drawing, a pentagon. And all the proportions are given right there, because the golden ratio circles following hexagon geometry will draw that pentagon perfectly right in the center. So to me, they haven't become a division. Now, I would say the division really is that the hexagon geometry is really about equal edges in all directions, right? So if you're tiling a plane on a floor and you have hexagons all over the place, they all butt up against one another. When you do that with pentagons, and this is also the quasi-crystal issue they had with quasi-crystals, is you can't just tile with pentagons, right? One is, pentagons are like not about structure. I mean, they're about structure, not about rigidity in terms of there's more golden ratio proportionality within them that almost kind of resist wanting to be flat, flattened out, because basically any spherical form that you create is going to have, like this one here. I have hexagons here that are warped a little bit and pentagons, but to make a spherical structure, you have icosahedral symmetry, which is a pentagon. So these little pentagons at top are what are almost like making the curvature on something that wants to be flat, like a flat plane, like a hexagon. And once I introduce this 5, all of a sudden, you're taking one of those struts out, it goes to 5. Now, all of a sudden, the whole thing wants to start to envelope around itself. So that would really be some of the differences to look at. It's like what's happening to the structure of the golden ratio, how it relates to creating the spheres that are associated with them is one way to look at it. Lots of ways to look at it. I mean, it's a huge topic on that one. And I know we're getting long-winded on this, so I do want to I'm pretty much done with the main thing. I just want to plow through just a few slides around the other offerings in new geometry and stuff like that, so people get a sense of what else I've been up to in new geometry. So do you feel like that's a good place, or do you have more questions around?
Oh, please go ahead. It's great. Thank you for answering.
Well, here's a 2D to 3D construction of the ones. This is one I drew with the apprentices. So last year I had an awesome opportunity to do the new geometry apprenticeship. And I did 45 teaching sessions with my apprentices last year. And these are all the different drawings that we did throughout that, from multiple different views, star polyhedra, basic drawings, star diagrams, and everything. This is actually, I turned into a course on new geometry courses. Now, this is all the apprenticeships from last year. So if you really I want to go deep dive into sacred geometry, this would be it from those live sessions. And these are some of the drawings that apprentices who never drew before sacred geometry were doing through their own creative expressions, 2 different geometers here. Of doing the different patterns and bringing them to life for themselves. Here's another example of the same batch of apprentices from that year, doing the dodecahedron and making pyramids, different circle patterns that we would come up with, more beautiful patterns and different forms created here. So this is really, from artistic creation to a pattern of just the geometric form to all that pentagon hexagon fusion in this one. These are all pentagons around this coming off of the hexagons in all different directions. So there's a lot of fusion that goes on, just to get back to your description done by new geometer apprentice. So just a fantastic array of possibilities. So the new geometry apprenticeship is coming up May 1st. I'll talk about that. But here's another one is the pyramid class. I've got a series on that. This is about the golden ratio pyramids and the Russian pyramid and infinite phi scaling and some beautiful designs in there. So there's some topics on my channel about that. And I teach you how to draw the pyramid, construct the pyramid, and the cone that fits in the pyramid, all using sacred geometry techniques. It's just a totally awesome course. Here's another thing. I came up with a beautiful Sri Yantra drawing technique using golden ratio pyramid and technique based on Patrick Flanagan's method, and came up with a real sweet method to do it. This is a free 40-page PDF hand download that shows you every step to draw this, and a free video drawing lesson. So check that out if you've ever wanted to draw the Sri Yantra design using golden ratio techniques. That's a fantastic way to enter into some new geometry.
I'm so intrigued by the Sri Yantra because it really looks to me like a wormhole, actually, that it's actually showing a tunnel. That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, totally. I mean, draw it up. I mean, the instructions are so easy to follow in that, and each step is laid out. So I had a great time figuring out how to do that. So new geometers, I mean, check it out. Here's a few things to follow up on here. Is my YouTube channel, always coming up with videos. My Facebook group, New Geometers, KNEW Geometers, great group, almost over 3,000 people in it. A lot of apprentices in there to share fascinating discoveries they're coming up with as they jam like, we're like an orchestra going on over there at this point. And it might feel a little intimidating because there's some stuff being produced there, but there's so much accessibility within the group to study designs and learn from them yourself. If you want to go further, I do have an apprenticeship coming up on May 1st, 8 sessions, and that's going to be a great next level of, it's starting with a lot of the basic stuff. I have returning apprenticeships as well for people, but this is a great way to start. And I also have just a regular course drawing platonic solids in the golden seed of life. So all that's at the new geometers course. So definitely check out some of those offerings. I think they're really fantastic. Every one of them is the ones I wish I had when I got started, because I'm really trying to refine this and make this really teachable, that you become, becomes your wisdom, right? And it moves past that I shared some knowledgeable information with this, but when you do engage with it and start to build or draw with it, you enter in that dialogue. So if you have the inclination or always wanted to do it, there's always something in there for even the most basic drawings to more advanced, depending on whatever you want to do. Here are some of the latest discoveries in new geometry that I've been really super thrilled about, which are the working with the nonagon face. I won't go into too much of this, another video on it. And just one little thing, Meredith, anything you want to add to those? Because I have one little last follow-up.
No, please go ahead.
Okay, because on Facebook today, I posted, I said, check out this golden snowflake before our presentation with our video link, because here's my morning's discovery, right?
Oh.
What's hiding in this golden snowflake? So this is just from the 7-circle seed of life. Okay, I just did the seed of life. I made a star, the red star, and then I just started connecting lines. Right? And I made these golden hexagons, which I love the golden hexagon, a lot into it. And I'm like, wow, Coxeter's nonagon star is in it. I couldn't believe it. Now this is going to sound like I'm out on another planet. But I'm calling this, and there'll be a video on it soon. This to me is, I call it the tree of light. There's so much awesome stuff in this. This Coxeter's nonagon star actually is all the way around the seed of life. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them make this beautiful pattern, right? And then I was like, well, wait a second. What if I make this star pattern, right? The Coxeter's nonagon star, the tree of light, all the way around. So I did this. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? What is this? Like, what is in these lines, right? Because nothing in this design is by accident. I'm sure of it, right? So I start to study it. And then all of a sudden I'm like, no way. All the platonic solids are in it, in nested drawing, right? So here's the cube in the middle. It just came out. And then I was like, hey, there's the icosahedron. All the lines are given. And it's actually the one that will fit in the cube. Remember how I showed you before how it missed on that angle? There's the dodecahedron. I can draw that one too. The lines are given. I could pop that right in the cube. And you put those two together. I didn't talk about this much. That's the rhombic trichontahedron. There's the octahedron. That one fits in the cube. Whoa, there's the star tetrahedron. That's in the cube. And the cube octahedron. I got from that line design from 6 hours ago or 7 hours ago, all the platonic solids were in that line drawing. I was blown away. And half an hour before I started this, I was like, can it stellate? Yes, it can. There's the small stellated dodecahedron matching up to all the vertices within that line pattern. So that, to me, that's new geometry.
What do you call that line pattern?
Well, I call this one the golden snowflake because it looks like a kind of snowflake. It's in that hexagon pattern. It's
Well,
got
once you find that other weird sounding name thing that, hey, you have all the 6 in there that you can then put all of it, like go again through that.
this
On
Coxeter's
the far bottom, adding the 6,
star.
whatever nonagons are.
Yeah, it's gotta find a name for it. It's gotta find a name. It's
Yeah.
great. And you
It's
know what
like
the
it's
amazing
not
thing
been
to me
seen
though,
before, right? Like that's what you're creating. That's what new geometry is just being able to go in and find different lines and shapes and find what's within them.
this is brand new. I don't believe this line drawing has ever been done, so I'm gonna have to come up with some nifty little name, but this, the beauty of this pattern is that I only drew 7 circles. This is all in the seed of life, right? Seed of life is, of course, 7 circles, 1 circle, blue circle, and the other ones. And then everything else is given in the lines, which
Yeah.
basically, which, because now I know how this works, like what lines connect to what. I was able to find this, and I was like, let's just do it all the way around, which basically means like earlier in history, someone could have done this, right? Like it's not too hard to come up with this. The key thing is that I stopped at the circle, and this is where the circle plays an important role in all this, because the stopping point here is the circle. If I just continued these out, I just get a point to another, a point rather than ending at the circle. See, the vision of where the circle interacts with the line, like I said before, is holding a lot of missing information,
Mhm.
right? And it's what drives this whole pattern, is this circle line interaction between the two, which allowed me that same little stopping right there to do a little connect the dots game to come up with this, right? So it's not like this stuff is, I'm just making up out of nowhere, right? It's like, this is just in the simplest pattern that exists with the compass. And
Yeah, and
there,
also what I really love is the idea that, I mean, when I so-called found geometry in the body, having no interest in geometry or math in the least, as I'm going through and learning so much more about geometry over the many years, like I didn't know that there are geometries that hadn't been created. Like you just created a whole other geometry. I didn't know that the geometry I found in the body was a geometry that hadn't been created, so to speak. I was like, what do you mean? Well, it's a geometry, like it must be out there, sort of thing. And of course it's in there, it's all in there, but I love that that you're like daily dreaming and coming up with new geometries. I didn't understand that when I started this whole path, that there are millions of different ways of creating new ideas, like a new thought pattern. It's
yeah,
fascinating.
no, it is. And just one last thing, it's like today was beautiful that it came up, because remember, this contains all the platonic solids, all in the cube. All of these I could put right back in the cube.
Yeah.
And you kind of like, here's a line pattern with 6 circles as the foundation that basically does everything that Metatron's cube says it does,
Mhm.
right? It's right there. I mean, every line in this pattern has filled with significance to the overall structure of these truthful geometric shapes. Nothing is a line a little off here or anything. Like this all jams together. And I gave it the stellation test to show that even there connects to the outer nodal points there. So like, I didn't just come up with this at day one. This is after doing all this and seeing and understanding all these relationships, like understanding the pattern language, really developing a relationship to see how all that comes together. But the mind-blowing thing is I could have got there from the beginning in just 6 circles.
Right, right,
It was like right there in the 6 circles all along.
right.
No other divine cut, no other thing that I taught through the golden circle method, any of that. It was like 6 circles and I had the whole thing.
It poses the beautiful philosophical question in every given moment. What is it that we're not seeing
Exactly.
in any given thing? Well, my brain feels beautifully worked out. My brain.
Okay, that was how I wanted to end it. I am totally full. I really appreciate it. I'm totally game for some questions, of course.
Yeah.
I'll stop to share, but thank you for those who were on and stuck it out. I hope we have a few people on here still, and I didn't lose a lot along the way.
Yeah, no, we do. And there's some questions. I know Deirdre had asked, I wonder if geometry is present in how cells initially divide in the fertilized egg. And yes, they go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8. And as soon as they hit 8, you have the cube or the star tetrahedron. So that's how we start. Holy rusted metal Batman was another comment. So Annette's asking, how was the yellow cord developed for those vertices? I think in the snowflake she's talking about. I don't know. Do you want to come on, Annette, and ask the question to George? And if anybody else wants to come on and ask a question, just drop it in the chat and I'll pull you up after that.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much, George. This is phenomenal. I'm a geometry teacher and I wish I had this when I was teaching my geometry courses, but yes, in that snowflake, were you setting those points on the circle in 6, or was there, it looked like that little cord, that little yellow cord wasn't a third from the point to the point. I don't know if that was an illusion or not.
Let me, the easiest thing is just to hop back on and show real quick, okay? So as long as you could see my screen, I'll just, it's a very simple setup. All good?
Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, so, you do the 6 circles around one, that speed of light pattern, right? And then if you made the red triangles, the 2 equilateral triangles, like you would in those valley spots, and you also have to do a line between the valley spots. So that line will continue up, and then you basically from those points right here, right on the inner hexagon, you're doing a hexagon inside the inner hexagon of the red. So inside the red triangles is a hexagon, right? Right here.
Yep.
And then the midpoint of that hexagon is where you send your line. And you send your line all the way until it hits the outer blue circles from the inner hexagon. And if you do that all the way around, right? Do another small hexagon on the inside, just extend those lines all the way out. That's how you get that chord that you're describing, right?
Excellent. I see it. Thank you.
Beautiful. That was amazing. Anybody else want to jump on and make a comment or a question? I feel like I've got like my brain is when I think this way, I get just like so engrossed and my mind kind of just goes to a different level and it kind of feels like a rain has just cleared everything out. It's like a clearance, a field clearance through my mind.
Well, I know I've been talking for about an hour and 40 minutes on all this, so that's a lot.
That's
It's more than
great.
I
No, it's
see
great.
in my videos.
It's like a fabulous meditation exercise.
Your hand up.
Oh, is there? I can't even see that.
Yeah,
I think
that was
Deirdre, was that, are you raising your hand or?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a question. I think my internet's a bit unstable. I have a question. What happens if you get it to move, if you introduce movement? Is there a way to introduce movement into the lines? I'm really curious what would happen because I'm really intrigued about, so I'm a craniosacral therapist and I'm not an expert in embryology, but I'm really curious if there's something, there's all these movements that happen when we're forming in the womb and the way the cells move. And I wonder if geometry is somehow driving it. I'm wondering if you played with your shapes and introduced movement, and if you did, how that might work.
Yes, the classic example of that is with Buckminster Fuller's jitterbug. He calls it. I have one up there. Maybe I'll just grab it real quick so I can kind of show you a little bit about that.
Yeah, I have a way that I would answer that from a somatic perspective too. So I'll just wait for George to finish and then.
Yeah, I'll talk about it from a geometric perspective, and I am able to draw this in a way, but Buckminster Fuller basically took that cuboctahedron shape that I drew in one of the last pictures, and he made the vertices, flexible, right? So just little rotations of this will create the icosahedron. So right there, all of a sudden, I'm creating pentagon faces by just a little shift like that. I get a pentagon. And if you keep going, you can move this and recreate, different You can even go all the way back to the tetrahedron, all the way by crumpling it all up. So he was trying to work with that, different tensegrity and showing how the forms move. Now, on the paper, you're basically taking like, here's a snapshot when it gets to here. Here's a snapshot when it gets to here in the rotation. So I am able to kind of show that, but it would really have to be done in a more of an animation type of way of doing that. But yeah, definitely the geometry is meant to, of course, not be just rigid and structured. There's a lot of movement that goes on there.
I think animation is a good way to describe it, because it is very much like having to have a certain, like when they make a cartoon, right? You have to have the picture here and then you change it slightly and you have the picture there and the picture there. My experience from that is that when I look, where's my shape? Here's my shape. So this is what I found in the body. And it was a sensory experience. And so when I finally found somebody who could take it out of the body and I spun it, I was tripped out to see the kind of the different patterns that happened in it. But my experience of it was not that I was trying to grab something static. This is not a static form, but it's a chance for my human mind to grab onto like a beam of light. When we see sunshine, right? Sunshine's in movement, light, day, everything's moving. And yet if you want to grab onto a light beam to understand what it is, you've got to hold it statically for a moment. So geometries to me, or when you were asking about, 1 cell to 2 cells to 4 cells to 8, and then you have the tetrahedral structure. And yes, it just keeps going. So life in motion is, geometry is just a mental tool like mathematics for the human mind to be able to understand motion in action, to understand how life is moving continually. If you even think about how people come on the planet and leave, we're just a wave, so, but when you stop, then there's an individual there, and that individual has a name and has a life. So I hope that helps from a somatic perspective too.
Thanks, Meredith.
Yeah. So one last thing, Gunter says, when I look down my central channel, I see naturally the holy geometry in a pulsing process going on all the time in it. Now I expand the central channel and I try to move my perspective, my consciousness, to watch myself from different perspectives. Any suggestion to make this focus process better? I think that's just consciousness, learning about consciousness, and however the path is that you do that. And whatever, to me, the somatic path of working in my body and working on other bodies puts me into a state of mind and wavelength. I was giving a session yesterday, and it's just so like nectar just starts to run through the body, and insights just come in, and the like I'm getting chills thinking about it. It's the temple space, it's the holy temple space, and whatever that means to people. And I do remember having a moment of a vision, we'll call it, when I was watching my mind trying to figure out where to put itself. And then I realized my mind was watching my mind go places, trying to figure out where to put itself while it was watching itself on the outside. We're always looking at the mirror of different things. So Gunter, I think it's a wonderful question. And I think the answer is just that we are consciousness watching itself. And for some strange reason, we find ourselves spinning on a rock in space in these particular dimensions. And I think that we are finding connections to other time zones, time spaces, and consciousnesses. And I think that is my personal way that I feel okay about getting up in the morning. It's just an exercise in consciousness. And then we go somewhere else and explore it somewhere else too. I don't know if that was Meredith's ramble at the end, but thank you all very much. Do you want to close with anything, George?
No, I mean, I did do the hand draw. I just want to show one last thing, because this really is how to bring all those digital things back to life, right? So here's what I did before coming on today in preparation for our talk was to actually draw this, the last pattern I showed you with those stars in the outside there. Here's the cube in the middle. These are those diamond faces of the other form nested inside. So, to me, this really helped bring all that study together, that I was describing, like that whole process, coloring it in a bit, engaging in the dialogue. There's so much in the sacred geometry that's going to communicate directly for you, like what you need. You're not going to do what I do, right? You might follow some of those things out and enjoy some of the contemplations that we may learn from each other from it. There's going to be something unique in these patterns that are going to really light you up, right? Inspire you and your spark of creativity. You might find a form, right? You know, you might just create a beautiful image you gave to someone for their birthday, right? And the lines don't even match up, look that great, right? Or to you at least, right? But it's perfect just as it is. So whatever it is that calls to you, there's a reason for it, and it will stimulate some part of your inner knowingness, inner creativity, and you know you don't know what that is, and no one can really tell you, but it's part of participation throughout it, however you like to do it, viewing images, watching videos, meditating with it, drawing it, constructing it. There's something in sacred geometry for everyone, because hey, we're sacred geometry. So anyway, that's all I have to say. I really appreciate all those that were in attendance today. That was really fun. Thanks for the questions. And the video will be recording. Pass it on to anybody that may be interested. That'd be awesome. And just check out the New Geometers Facebook group. Like I said, that's the group, the Sri Yantra course. Or
And
any
your
other
new program starting on May 1st. Where do
Starting-
people find it? It's just knewgeometry.com/courses, yeah? Or
It's all one word. New Geometry course is one word, and that started May 1st. So pretty soon on that. None of those apprenticeships are always the same. I'm always doing little modifications, but I don't just jump into the deep end of the pool. Of course, there's a lot of background. People who've never drawn sacred geometry before are just amazed with what they're producing, which is just phenomenal and fantastic.
beautiful.
So-
Well, can you just drop the link into your direct May 1st program so that people who are on currently can check it
Okay.
out, and then otherwise people can go to newgeometry.com. Yeah.
I'll do that. Do you want to just say a few closing words while I just hunt down the link?
Yes, sure. Thank you all very much for coming. And I just really get very excited by these conversations. And my purpose in creating some temple talks is just to be able to share some more fun brain candy that I personally think is really an important aspect of social activism, personal daily activism. I think for me, just trying to keep myself growing and cleaning up all the edges that could use cleaning up in my own being, having a daily practice with my body and working with my mind in this way is a way to see how everything is linked and everything is together and interrelated, so that we can do less harm to ourselves and to other people on the planet. So to me, it becomes a real activism. And for whatever it is to you, thank you very much for coming on to play with us. And geometryofhealing.com is my website. And George has his link up there. Do you, George? Yep.
Yep.
Fabulous.
Yeah,
not-
really, once again, thanks for
It's
coming.
not coming up on the chat.
It's not? Oh, I thought I did it. Oh, I didn't hit return?
There you
Whoops,
go. Okay.
Did it?
newgeometrycourses.com. Check it out. Thanks, everyone. Really
Thank you
appreciate
so much.
it. Talk to you next time. Thanks, George. That was awesome.